All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Andrew, ThatGamerAjax. And with me today is a very special guest. I'm so happy to have him here on the channel. This is Nathan. He's the Dungeon Master of Reckless Attack podcast. They were recently featured on Gizmodo. I've been following them for a very long time. He's also the father of Toast in a Pokemon Nuzlocke stream.
I am at the moment.
He's been a ton of fun to watch and to see grow. And really, is there anything else that I missed that you'd like to just add about either yourself or Reckless Attack?
Hello, listener, viewer, I guess. Viewer, I'm used to it. I'm too built in from actual play podcasting. We are a 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons actual play podcast. We release weekly. We are a show of friends, of foes, of, kind of like classic evil and good struggles and exploration and mystery and frogs, mostly frogs.
So many frogs.
Too many frogs. And we also do interview shows, much like this one, 2 every month with tabletop role-playing game creators. I also run the social media for Reckless Attack. Reckless Account is what I almost called it. I guess it is the Reckless Account, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, that's what I do, I guess. Okay. And what we do. That's our whole thing.
All right, so let's go ahead and just dive right into talking shop. So one thing that I have really liked about Nathan's style is that it's a very, very collaborative experience. You hear a lot of players giving feedback and getting involved in world building and everything like that. So I was wondering, can we talk a little bit about how did you just come up with that style in the first place? How did you know to talk at and include your players? Where did you find your style?
Yeah, that's a great question and a complicated one, as I'm sure it is for everyone, right? Ultimately, because we are all a mess of influences that have been, simmered for however many months or years you've been playing. But I think for me, I have kind of a little bit of a clarified version of it, where I think one of the first games that I was in was with a friend, Steve, not Reckless Attack Steve, a different Steve, who had been playing for a very, very long time, since he was a kid, was a writer, was a, actually professional actor, had literally written for Wizards of the Coast. Wow. and you can see his name in the monster manual. That's how I met him, or how we connected over D&D. He was literally in the cafe I was working at, writing the monster manual, which is nuts, obviously. But he had a very evocative style and a very collaborative style that worked really hard to enmesh the player and the character kind of into the same mindset, of saying essentially ooh, this thing reminds you of this, and almost unbidden, and trying to get you kind of into the headspace of your character in kind of a classic actor / writer way. And it worked really well, but I also hated it. and we have talked about it. We got into a fight over it once. It was a whole thing, but we have emerged. It is all good. Hi, Steve. I'm sure you're not watching, but I love you deeply.
You never know.
Right. Exactly. And I loved that. I loved that approach a lot. I loved the meaning behind it and the intent behind it a lot, but it didn't jive for me personally. Essentially, I liked the line between being told, here's what your character feels, and you react to that and you act that out, kind of more of a give and take thing. And I liked the line just a little bit further towards fuller player agency, if that makes sense. That distinction makes sense. And so I as I was kind of getting in and absorbing a lot of other podcasts, a lot of other DMs and adventures even, and information about DMing, I kind of, and it was not intentional, I don't think. I think it just happened, but slowly kind of got into the habit of realizing the power of asking players, how do you feel? How does your character feel about this? And pausing and just saying, well, hey, this is a weird thing. This kind of, it reminds me of this thing or this part of your backstory. Does that ring true for you? Does that ring true for your character? Is that something interesting? And that's it's very low hanging fruit, but is such a great way to do the same, similar kinds of work of hey, let's marry the moment, the fiction, your character, and you all kind of into one nice little package a little bit more. And the results were amazing. Honestly, like I will never not do that as a DM, or if I don't do it as a DM, I have failed myself and the player, because it's so powerful and is almost that extra step beyond, you know, when you tell a new player you can do anything in D&D, right? Or in any tabletop role-playing game, like
Right.
whatever you want to do, right? It's the dice will tell you if it works and I will tell you what happens, but like you can try anything. And that is an aha moment when that clicks for players. And then for me, I now view the, hey, and like, let's pause. And what does your character feel about this? You know, like let's build a space for you to be able to react and build your character and build the scene and build the mood. And that is kind of another almost aha moment for everyone, I feel like, where it's just you realize like, oh, okay, let's flesh things out. Let's get a little bit deeper. Let's you know, root ourselves in the moment and in the character and that kind of stuff. And then for me, it just kind of naturally grew from there, where it went from, hey, how do you feel about this thing, or like, what about this, to, hey, I don't know, do you where would you have learned this information that you rolled well on, and hey, I don't know, does this remind you of anything from your past, whatever. And so it kind of slowly got teased out, especially with the Reckless Attack crew, who have all DM'd at least a little bit, some of them a lot, and are also just like super rock star individuals who are down for my nonsense. And now we're kind of in a nice spot where I am still the arbiter of the world. I am the simulation, the AI simulation, you know, making sure everything is running, but there's a lot of value in 5 different perspectives and a lot of validity in 5 different perspectives. And like, why leave stuff on the table? You know, why leave opportunities? Why leave buy-in from the players and ownership in the world away from players? And obviously it goes, you know, that's a tough line to walk. We've been playing together for a long time. So like, mostly they understand like my style and the world and the vibes that everyone else at the table likes. But we've fallen into a really nice place where that now is just kind of a second nature thing. And I always try to leave space for the players. I try to an extent, if it's like, hey, this is something your character might know ahead of time or have experienced ahead of time, like, can I just like shoot you a quick message or a text to be like, does this sound good? Does this make sense? Do you have anything to add to it? Okay. But that's just kind of now built in naturally, a part of our process. And I love doing it. It's very effective.
Yeah. So if you don't mind me asking, just when do you think would be those like good moments, especially for like newer dungeon masters or people that are like really starting to kind of get into this? When are those good moments to ask, like, how does your character feel? Because personally, I know that when I was listening, and I'm not going to spoil anything, obviously. So, you know, if you have new listeners that are joining, but there was like this big battle. And I remember you took like a couple minutes to just pause and ask every character, like, what is going through your mind in this moment? And it really drove home like how important this battle was. So when would you recommend that people kind of ask those questions and take that moment to pause?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And you know, you sense it out eventually, but I think to start, if it's something you're interested in doing and working on and practicing, because it takes practice as a DM to know those moments and to allow yourself to ask that question and like give up your white knuckled grip of control on the pace and everything. The start of the session, like, especially if you left it at a cliffhanger, or if you finished something epic and big and meaningful, that's such a nice way to get into the headspace to keep playing for the next couple hours. You know, it's like it grounds you, it grounds the players and the characters, and kind of gets them thinking like their characters and like their characters in the world and in their present situation. And that for me is, you know, almost a combination of a warm up and a, you know, kind of like expectation setting in a way, right? Of like, here's where we're at. Like, it's one of those sessions, we're getting into it, and like, let's all just take a moment and get to know our characters and each other a little bit more. So I think that that's really big. And then anytime that there is something dramatic or scary or something that relates to a character's backstory, a grand reveal, a whatever, where it was something that you realize like, oh, hey, you mentioned that your character is afraid of ants and now there's a giant ant. How are they reacting? Stuff like that. It's one thing to just put those sorts of things into the adventure, which is awesome and powerful and important. But it's another to and sometimes players will just run with that, right? Well, they'll be like, I see you put those giant ants in the adventure. I will react accordingly. But it's another thing to mindfully stop and pause and say, hey, I would like to hear from you. And I think it's important to hear from you about how your character is feeling about this thing. And sometimes those moments happen organically. Sometimes it's when you're getting ready to run an adventure or a whole campaign. You're like, this is going to be a big one. Is this reveal or this moment or this like that'll, I'm designing it to have that big emotional thing. And then just remembering to stop for a moment and almost let that drama get elevated by saying out loud, here's the stakes, here's how I'm feeling, here's the drama, here's the terror, here's the joy of what I'm going through, is I think again something you develop, but something that you can, once you know what to look for, you start seeing them a lot.
Yeah, and obviously that's going to start coming like the longer that you play with people. I mean, I know that
absolutely,
like you and your team, like you guys have played together, like you did a full campaign even before starting Reckless Attack. That's just from what I picked up on with the Reckless Talks. But also just something that I've noticed is that like your players are very obviously invested in your world. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about world building. Could you give some tips just on like when you were building the setting for Reckless Attack? How long did you work on that, and how much player input was there on that?
Yeah, that's another great question, and it's a complicated question for reasons that are not as simple as sticking to the topic. The short complicated answer was that COVID happened, and then during COVID, I realized that our campaign was a little colonial, a little kind of like traveling to different parts of the world and experiencing different cultures and solving their problems for them through violence, which is like not great. It's totally fine for a home table, absolutely, and like go to your fantasy places wherever, but like being a public facing thing and just a kind of general trying to be more mindful, respectful consumer and creator of content externally and internally, I realized that like I'm not going to be able to. These are not my stories to tell. This is not this is not a skill set that I have of building perfect civilizations that are diverse and respectful and yada yada. So that was a complication. And we'd already built our campaign when COVID hit. Like we had a lot of ideas. We were essentially going to be fantasy Star Trek. It was going to be cool. There were going to be like, portals traveling all over. It's exploration. It's like ambassadorship. It's murder hoboing. Like it's all the things you want. Right. And so I came to this realization, and I told the group, and they were angels about it, of course, because they are angels. And then I had to restart the whole thing, and I was stumped. I had nothing. Like all creativity was gone again because it was the pandemic. It was I was sad that the thing we had been working on was gone essentially. I mean, there was lots to pull from, but like nope, we can't do that anymore. And it got to the point where I just had to turn to the players. And I don't remember if I mentioned it or if they mentioned it or what, but like we eventually just had to come together and just come up with a new campaign all together. And that is not how I usually operate. I usually operate, and I think maybe I still had like a nice kind of like pitch document, but I operate in the I think I've seen you tweet or whatever about Matt Colville stuff. But the classic, the pitch document, right? Of like, here's 8 adventure theme ideas and campaign ideas. Which one do you want? We sat down instead and played a game of Microscope, which I don't know if you've ever played it or heard of it, but it is go ahead.
Well, I've heard you mention it.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, I was very excited to hear your Reckless Talk. But that's the first I'd heard of it actually.
Yeah.
I've never done it. I'm interested to know more about it though.
Yeah, it's really cool. And it's an older game now, I think. I mean, in terms of like game life cycles. So it could be, 8 years old or something like that, and mean nothing. But basically, long story short, it is a part of a series of games by I think the guy's name is Tim Robbins, maybe, but it's Microscope. You can Google it and find it, and it is essentially a game for world building, and it is essentially just creating a timeline of a world, of a kingdom, of whatever, and jumping around between eras, between decades, between months or weeks, whatever kind of your scope of timeline is, and then just like throwing shit at the wall. and it's more structured than that. There's like, you take turns with who you're playing with, and there's a segment where you all say, hey, either this is something I don't want in our world for personal, like X-cardy kind of reasons, or it's like, hey, what if we did a Dungeons and Dragons world where there's no clerics? I don't know. And like, it's way more nuanced than that. But literally all we did was just sit around and throw ideas at a timeline, and expand upon that and say like, ooh, okay, now that's an interesting idea. And then what if, because of that, it ties into this thing? And so at the end of that, we came up with this really kind of cool timeline with really interesting flavors. Almost all of the coolest shit, if from Reckless Attack, of the world and the history, at least was inspired by that. Then I took it, and then I hid away, and I was like, ignore everything that you just saw, because I'm going to tweak a lot of this, but like, well, you got the ideas out there was the point. And then I came back, I thought about like, okay, what's the stories that I'm interested in here, and what's the themes that I'm interested in, and how do those marry together? And then I came back to the group saying like, okay, cool, I have a couple ideas, and then kind of took off from there. I try to provide them with some stuff where I ask them questions of like, okay, so like you want to be part of it, what if you were part of an adventuring guild, and like, what if it's a good guy? We all want to be good guys, so like, it needs to be a good guy adventuring guild, so create characters that are good guy adventuring guild people. But then it's just a question of, and again, my group likes coming up with stuff for their characters. They love their characters just as much as I love their characters, and so I asked them questions. I even sent them a like, hey, if you have time, here's a shitload of questions about your character and their backstory, and like, think about it. You don't have to answer them, just think about it. And then so really from the beginning, the players were really involved, and they got to tell me what they were interested in and what they thought was cool, and that's what DMing is just shoveling things that they might think are cool in front of them.
Okay, well, and this isn't the first time that I've heard of like questionnaires being sent out to players to kind of like help flesh out those characters. But would you be willing to provide maybe a couple of like quick examples of questions that you like to ask when you have people that are making characters that you're going to be playing with? Yes,
in fact, I think I still have the questionnaires. Yeah, I found them. Okay. So I do. So this is and this is like cribbed together from a lot of different, other sources and other people who have put a lot of thought into these sort of things that I just said, cool, yoink, I'll take that. Which is the mark of any good dungeon master.
And also, I just wanted to say, there is nothing wrong with stealing good stuff for like, I'm going to be completely honest.
Correct.
I actually took your idea of like the runic roads, and I'm using that in one of my home games because I'm like, this is a cool idea. I really like this.
Take cool stuff and put it in your game.
Exactly.
Easy. Especially for home games. Like, steal everything for home games. It's great. It's cool. It's the best. So I try to run a pretty wide gamut, and this was, it was too many questions ultimately. Like this was when I was when it was pandemic. And so therefore, like, all I wanted to think about was podcast, and D&D and doing anything else. But also where I was very worried about like, okay, it's a podcast, so like we gotta we got to have our stuff locked down, like we got to have a clear idea, at least minimally, of like who the characters are, what their perspectives are, how they might react to things, where they came from, yada, yada. So, it's everything from like, where did you grow up? That sort of thing. And it could be a couple sentences. It could be a whole thing. It could be, like what's a moment that shaped you?
Okay.
Like, or what pushed you into adventuring? What does your character value? The classic like values, traits, flaws thing. I'm looking, where are they most comfortable?
Okay.
When are they the least comfortable? I'm like scrolling, whether they have family or not, whether they have a secret, someone in their backstory who they care a lot about, someone in their backstory who does not care for them, or who hurt them. Just stuff kind of along those lines.
Okay.
I'm looking to see if there's any other like particularly good ones, but like really it's just about like trying to shape the character's perspective, first of all, of trying to be like, okay, cool, I know enough about this character, even if it's not the nitty gritty details, but I know enough about this character to know how they're going to react to stuff. And that takes knowing what they think is important, what they value, what they and what they hate, essentially. Like what is like, this is abhorrent, this is bad, or this is like just against what I believe in. And you can get a lot of juice from that. Okay. You can get a lot of cool stuff. And then you ask, again, just the basics of like, okay, cool. Now that I know what you care about, and I know a little bit about where you're from, how do those merge together? Like, what kind of society would produce a Valeska Carter? And like, what does that mean? Okay, cool. So this cleric is a cleric of knowledge, cares a lot about, spreading knowledge, cares a lot about, comes from an order of scholars who, are in this giant library, perfect repository of knowledge and of openness and of trying to inform people. It's like, well, okay, well, how did it get like that? What does that mean? And like, just being able to like, and how does this play into things? And just kind of getting that little seed is really all I need, at least, to kind of just start like sprinting. And weaving it in from there.
All right. Well, last major question that I have for you is, I know we've talked a lot about, including player agency. Your players are very obviously very involved with your table. Yeah. When do you give them those moments to kind of come up with things on the fly? I know that some of the things that I've seen is, you have checkers like wandering around and just kind of like coming up with stuff on the fly. Like how do you incorporate those into like your notes or your planning, and like how much agency do you give them to kind of shape the world around them?
Yeah. I try very hard. My DMing style, when I'm coming up with adventures or plots or whatever, is the world exists and there's something happening and you are dropped in it, and you have to figure it out. You may get some information, you might get no information, and just something happens. And any time that there's a gap in dramatic beats that I've come up with, of like, okay, cool. I know that I want this boss fight. And I know that like there should be a patrol in there somewhere. I want to be sure that I'm describing this thing or whatever. It's like, well, okay, they have to travel, right? Well, I don't want to come up with something. Let's have them come up with something. Okay. And of like, any time that it's any amount of like window dressing that isn't vital to setting the scene, then I like turning it over to the players, or I also like even outside of the session being able to say like, hey, you guys are going to be traveling this episode. I might ask you what cool thing you run into. Okay. Or I, just because some people like doing it on the fly, and other people are like, I'd like to think about it and kind of like have something ready to go. But I think it's, for me, is just like try to come from a perspective of, yes, of course, like I know the drama, I know the main bits, but like, what do you guys want? What do you want to see? What's cool? What's the vibe? Okay. And I want to, I want to inject plenty. I feel like I inject plenty of that with plot important things, you know,
Yeah.
of like, I will tell you what the Red City of Agmar looks and feels like, because it's important that I tell you that. And it's important that I tell you what this dungeon feels like and like what the atmosphere is, because it's either overarching or it is important to a plot. But like anything else kind of beyond that, what's a weird thing that you see on the cupboard of this this hag's, you know, hut that you've in? Like, what's the weirdest, grossest thing that Checkers sees? You know, just like that sort of thing is like, yes, of course, I can come up with just a list of adjectives and of weird descriptors or whatever, and I will, but like, I'll save a couple for them and you know, and just kind of like let them almost like you know, let them set their own scenes, and especially anything that they might care about and might be interested in, like a guild hall. Like, I don't know, yeah, tell me, what do you want in a guild hall? What's cool?
Okay.
I don't have any like anything that I care about, I will put in and I'll tell you that it is there. But like, I don't, you know, I don't have a great compulsion about whether you have a garden or not.
Okay.
But you're telling me you have a garden or want a garden. Sick, great. And like now they have a garden that they love, and isn't that like a wonderful thing? And
yeah, absolutely.
and you know, that kind of stuff. So you know, it's just anytime that I don't care, you know, or don't have a good idea, or again, that it's not vital, I like to, when possible, just ask, be like, I don't know, what's a cool idea?
Okay. All right. And before we close this out, I just wanted to just kind of give you one more open-ended question, and really just what kind of general tips would you give for somebody that is either a dungeon master or game master, and either they're just getting started or they're wanting to improve? What tips would you give them for getting their players like really involved?
Yeah, I think it changes. It's hard to give one size fits all advice for any table, right?
Yeah.
Because everyone's different. Every individual is different. Every table's different. And what each person wants changes based on their day and their week and whatever. But I think ultimately the surefire solution for that is to talk to your players. And that's, yes, nod, totally. But talk to your players and be open about what you want out of the game and what they want out of the game. And try to get everyone on the same page, or try to get people who will be on the same page mostly. And then just keep talking about it, you know, and because I view my job as a DM certainly to have cool stories, to make the people feel awesome and heroic, and also challenge them and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately my job, really, as far as I view it, is to give them a cool experience, and to allow them to give each other cool experiences, you know? And so that is my mindset, and the easiest way to do that, even now, even with a group that I have been playing with for a long time, and who I know their brains and hearts pretty well as a DM can, still get surprised at things that they want, totally overlook something where it's like, well, of course we haven't had a combat in a while, so like it would make sense that they would want a combat because they like combat. And so it's easy, you know, it's even easy for me to get, you know, off in my own BS. but just asking them like, hey, what do you want? What's interesting? What would make you happy? What's something that your character, like, is there a part of your character that you want to explore? Is there something that you want to be, you know, whatever? Is just asking them and setting up a, hopefully, you know, knowing that not everyone wants to talk about these things, not during the session, which is also valid and fine, but setting up a rapport and a culture and a level of safety and comfort where you can just be like, hey, just checking in. How's it going? What do you want? And like, then listening to it genuinely, because there's no better way to get buy-in than just giving people what they want. And that sounds silly and simplistic.
No, it is entirely true though.
But if everyone, you know, wants to go see a Marvel movie, and you're like, I had this other idea for a thing that wasn't a Marvel movie. They might still enjoy it, but like they will get invested if they're in the mood for a Marvel movie, and also they're the stars of the Marvel movie. Like, yeah, of course they would. And of course, you know, hey, you can have a cool world and that's all, you know, intricately constructed and has themes and has hooks and has tension and has, you know, glory and all the things that you want. But like making a player care about something you care about is different than giving them something they care about. Okay. And incorporating that, and then you get excited about that thing because you've worked on it together. And that for me is what I not that I do perfectly at all, but something that's the mindset that I try to take is just like you will surprise yourself at how much you can still give people what they want in ways that surprise them. Like you know, I have a lot of anxiety and a lot of like desire to, you know, have kind of control over the narrative, right? And to be able to like, no, I want your characters to be surprised and I want you to be surprised, right, by this thing. But like, you can tell me you want a combat soon and I'll say like, cool, I will get you a combat soon. I hear you, absolutely. And the fact that you roll initiative sometime in the next session is if you throw it at them in a weird enough way or in a dramatic or cool enough or whatever enough way, they will still be surprised. They will still have that oh crap moment. Like, don't worry about it. You will trust your creativity, trust your players. Just it's fine, you know. Just build off of each other, and it'll go great.
All right. Okay, well, I think that's going to wrap up the questions that I have for you. I will make sure that we have links to everything Reckless Attack related in the description of this video. But Nathan, just really want to thank you for your time and speaking with me. Honestly, your insights are invaluable. I love Reckless Attack. I recommend this show to everybody. I personally think that this is one of my favorites. Like this is up there for me with like Critical Role, Dimension 20. Like you guys are doing fantastic things. But, all right, well, but thank you.
Thank you.
It's really appreciated.